So I was doing some research, and I found this really fascinating piece of research. And the research says that running and exercise helps with decision making. And I want you to know that that is true. I went running this week, and I decided I'm never going to do that again. It's terrible. It is horrible. Like, did you know when you run, you can't breathe? It's the worst thing ever. In fact, the same is true with vegetables and being nice to your sister. I tested it out. Those are decisions you do, and I've decided I am never going to do again. Vegetables? Now, I can't be the only one in the room, right? There's no way. Like, we know what's good for us. We know it's good for us to exercise. We know it's good for us to eat our vegetables. We know it's good for us to be nice to our sister. The problem is, every time I start exercising, something else hurts, right? And once you get to like that 40 age, you're like, man, everything just begins to change. And like I totally get I should eat my fruits and vegetables, but the problem is that the banana flavored Laffy Taffy, it tastes so much better than a regular banana. Like, amen? And your sister, my sister, somebody's got to give her a hard time. I got to keep her humble, right? It's funny that we know that there are things that are good for us to do, but it's hard to actually get us to change our behavior. And the problem usually isn't information. In fact, people who research behavior, they talk about that lasting transformation rarely happens when your life is comfortable. It typically happens after a crisis, whether that be a diagnosis, a divorce, a breakdown, a failure, a wake-up call. You go through something traumatic, and these researchers call this a precipitating event, a moment when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change. Change comes when we become desperate enough. Which is why the movie Groundhog's Day connected with so many when Groundhog's Day came out many years ago. That movie, Bill Murray is a weatherman, and he gets sent to cover the Groundhog Day story in Pontuxet, Pennsylvania. I can't even say. I'm not even going to try and say it. A town that Bill Murray's like, this is totally beneath me. I'm not going to go to this podunk little town. It's miserable. And you know the story that Bill Murray, he wakes up every day and he is trapped in the same day in the same place. And as the story goes on, the movie goes on, he becomes increasingly strategic maybe, I don't know, strategic or manipulative, trying to change his circumstances. And no matter what he does, he can't fix the problem. Eventually, Bill Murray realized that the real prison wasn't the town and the day that he was stuck on. The real prison was himself. Because the horror of the movie is not repeating the same day. The horror of the movie is realizing that we keep becoming the same person. We keep doing the same things. And this is the problem with Groundhog's Day. It's not circumstances. Because everywhere he goes, he keeps bringing the same version of himself. And how many of us would look at our life and be like, yeah, I guess I've seen that in myself as well. See, many of us, haven't we learned the same thing to be true of ourselves? You can change jobs. You can trade one relationship in for the other. You can move cities. You can try a different routine. And it's funny how we do these things and how we somehow just keep running into ourselves. Because that change that we want usually doesn't happen when life is easy. In fact, I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, hardships often prepare ordinary people for extraordinary blessings. I mean, we would all acknowledge, like, hardship, nobody thinks hardship feels great. Nobody enjoys going through that. In the middle of it, you're like, this is terrible. It's like you're wrestling in the dark. But those hardships often become the very tools that God used to change us. Not by teaching us to try harder or to come with a better method or to get stronger, but by breaking us so we become desperate for God and God alone. So we are jumping back into our series, Grasping in Grace, as we've been studying the life of Jacob for the past number of weeks. Jacob in Genesis is a man whose life has been defined by grasping and self-sufficiency. That has been his story. And we've seen how God has been pursuing him and chasing him and trying to redeem him so he could change his story, for no longer would he be defined by grasping, but he could be a person defined by grace. And I love that story because I want that story to be the story of my life. Someone who was formerly defined by these things who can now be defined by the grace of God. We saw last week in Genesis chapter 32, he was facing intense pressure. He had this fear that came over him because he was going to go reunite with his brother who 20 years earlier said, I'm going to kill you. And so Jacob prays his prayer of faith, and this beautiful prayer. You see faith is taking root, but then Jacob quickly reverts back to his self-sufficiency, reverts back to trying to control the outcomes. And we saw last week that oftentimes for so many of us, there's this gap between our desire and our intent and the patterns of our life. And I think the question I want us to wrestle with this morning, it's true for Jacob, it's true for ourselves, and it's true for the people around us. The question is, can we change? Can we change? Is change possible? When we look at our life, when we look at the way we're wired, the mistakes we make, is it possible for us to change? We're going to see the famous story of Jacob wrestling with God. And we're going to learn that change is possible, but probably not in the ways that we thought it was going to happen. Because God changes us not through greater effort, not through better systems, not through making us stronger. God changes us by breaking our grip completely, by breaking our grip totally, so we have nothing to do but simply to depend and trust in him. So 4 points today. Number 1, Jacob's new battle. It says in verse 22, Genesis 32, verse 22, that Jacob took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford for the Jabbok, and he sent them across the stream. And then verse 24, it says, Jacob was left alone. So you can picture Jacob and his family, they're on the run, right? They're returning to the promised land. Behind them is Laban. He can't go back. In front of him is his brother Esau, last time they talked, his brother was going to murder him. And so Jacob makes a decision. I'm going to send everybody across the river except for him. For the first time in Jacob's life, there's no more moves for him to make. For the first time, he's like, I can't scheme my way out of this. I can't solve this issue. I've got Laban behind me. I can't go back. In front of me, I've got Esau, and he's coming with 400 men. And I don't know if he's coming to get reconciliation or to get revenge. Jacob has nothing left to do. He's exhausted. No schemes, no plans, no strategies. He's left alone in the dark by himself. And suddenly, verse 24 says that a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. I mean, can you imagine just being out on the bank of the river by yourself, and all of a sudden someone comes and wrestles with you? And I'm like, who is this person? Right? It's dark. Jacob probably can't see very well. Maybe it's Esau. Maybe Esau's coming. Hey, we're going to go one-on-one, and I'm going to take my revenge out on you now, bro. Maybe Esau has sent an assassin, and this is an assassin who's come and tried to take care of the battle that way. The text is deliberately mysterious about who this man is. Now, if you're one of those people that likes to write notes in your Bible, maybe in the margin of your Bible, write Hosea chapter 12. Hosea wrote about this passage, and he said in verse 4 that Jacob strove with an angel and prevailed. So as Hosea calls this person that Jacob is wrestling with, he calls him an angel. But look at this. Lower in our text, Genesis 32, verse 30. Jacob names the place Peniel and says, for I have seen God face to face. So who is this man? Theologians would call this a Christophany. A Christophany is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. You can picture this. This is Jesus coming down to Jacob in the mud on the banks of the river Jabbok. And notice the way the text is written. Notice who it was that started the fight. It says, the man, Jesus, wrestled with him, Jacob. It doesn't say Jacob wrestled with the man. It doesn't say Jacob was like, dude, there's someone coming, I'm going to go and pick a fight. It says the man wrestled with Jacob. Jacob wasn't looking for a fight. The fight came to him, which means God's the one who initiated this fight. And you think about Jacob's life, like Jacob had battled everything and everyone his entire life. He was the self-sufficient grasper. And this is a new battle. This was initiated by God. And the reason why is significant. Listen, I want you to know that this is a God that we serve. This is the God that we follow. Our God doesn't watch from the distance, right? He hasn't just sent us a bunch of instructions and he's waiting for us to comply. No, we have a God who literally gets into the dirt with us. And sometimes, in fact, more often than not, that's exactly what God does. He comes down to our level. He gets down to where we are. It's like, hey, let's do this. Let's do this together. I'm with you, right? In fact, Tim Keller said this. Tim Keller said, sometimes God has to wrestle us into a changed life rather than comfort us into one. I mean, how many of us would say, I prefer comfort, right? I would prefer like a gentle nudge, maybe a quiet whisper. But there's many of us in this room that would say the reason why I am different today is because something was broken in me. Something was stripped away in me. Something stopped working. And in that darkness is when God showed up and God began to bring change. So here we find Jacob alone in the dark and the wrestling begins. And number 2 for us this morning, we're going to see Jacob taking a new posture. It says in verse 25 that the man could not prevail against Jacob. And I'm like, hold up, that seems strange. You've got Jesus, the Son of God, wrestling against Jacob, and it says the man could not prevail against a middle-aged schemer like Jacob. That doesn't make sense, right? How could Jacob literally hold his own all night long? There's a theologian by the name of A.W. Pink, and this is what he wrote about this passage. He said, Jacob is not wrestling a man to obtain a blessing. But listen to this. A man is wrestling Jacob to obtain something from him. Which makes me understand in this passage that God is not trying to defeat Jacob. He's trying to reach him. This is not a mugging. This is a pursuit. See, he spent his life trusting in himself. Jacob has relied on his own strength and his wisdom. And here in this wrestling match, hour after hour, what is God doing? He is stripping away every layer of Jacob's strength, of his self-sufficiency. So Jacob has absolutely nothing left to rely on and can do nothing but look to God. Like that's the story of this wrestling match. That hour after hour, God is stripping all the self-reliance away, all the strength away. So Jacob has nothing left. God is after Jacob's heart. And God is willing to spend all night wrestling in order to get it. And then verse 25, the end of that verse, it says, the man touched Jacob's hip socket. And Jacob's hip went out of joint as he wrestled. Now, you medical people may understand this, but your hip is probably the strongest joint in your body. And here, in this wrestling match, in an instant, the man touches the hip, and the hip gets dislocated immediately. And that should tell us something. It wasn't that God was unable to end the fight earlier. He was unwilling to do it earlier. Because I think the man needed Jacob to be empty. Because in order for God to fill us, first he has to empty us. And I think God needed Jacob to be broken at his strongest point in order for Jacob to finally stop trusting in that strongest point. I can't do anything left. I mean, you think about how many of you have ever been to the physical therapist? Like, those guys are the worst. They're jerks, right? Because they're going to take whatever part of your body that's broken, and they're going to push it and push it and push it. And you're like, this hurts. But they're doing it in the right ways that are going to lead to healing. They're trying to restore what we can't do on our own. And I think you see this idea of this man wrestling with Jacob, wrestling with him to the point that he's going to cause his hip to be dislocated. So Jacob has nothing left to do. He can't rely on himself anymore. God is doing what only God can do, what Jacob couldn't do on his own. And this is when the story changed. This is where the climax is. Verse 26. Jacob said to the man, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And I read that, and I'm kind of like, that's arrogant. Like, Jacob, like you're so arrogant. But we got to read it in context. That's not the case. Jacob is in the moment of pain and weakness. And I see this as a new posture, right? Because Jacob, his hip is shot. He can't keep fighting. He can't run away. The only thing left that he can do, I mean, you think about this. You think about being in a fight, right? You're dislocated. You have no strength left. What are you left? What can you do? All you can do is cling. All you can do is cling on to whatever it is and I think that's what Jacob's doing. Jacob is grabbing on to God and saying, I'm not going to let you go. I mean, Jacob's whole life, he has grabbed. He grabbed for Esau's heel. He grabbed for his father's blessing. He grabbed for his father-in-law's flocks. He has grabbed his entire life. That was his identity. But here, the object is totally different. Because Jacob is not grasping for a blessing. He's grasping for the one who gives it. He's not trying to say, I need this. He's trying to hold on to God to say, God, I need you. Which is why when God says, hey, let go of me, Jacob says, no, I can't. He is clinging to God and refusing to let go. This isn't arrogance. This isn't being presumptive. This is desperation, right? He's a broken man with a dislocated hip, with nothing left to grab onto other than God himself, the only thing that is still standing. And what's remarkable about that, and I want you to hear this, what's remarkable about this is God honors it. Like, how cool is that? That Jacob, completely broken, with nothing left to other than God, and he says, God, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And God literally honors it. Like, this is the turn in Jacob's story. His grip isn't fixed. He didn't become stronger through this. No, he was broken. And no longer is it Jacob trying to get the blessing for himself. Now he's forced to grab onto something that can actually hold him. He's grasping on God for the very first time. Number one, we see Jacob in a new battle. Number two, Jacob has a new posture. Number three for us this morning, Jacob has a new identity. The wrestling match is over. Jacob is broken. He is clinging to God. He is desperate. And God asked him a question, verse 27. He says, what is your name? And if you've been with us over this series, or if you've read the book of Jacob, the book of Genesis, you know the story of Jacob. The last time someone asked Jacob that question, remember when that was? Genesis 27, where his blind and dying father said, who are you? And Jacob lied and said, I'm Esau. And he did so he could steal the blessing. And now Jacob has asked that same question, who are you? And he says, I'm Jacob. This is the truth. I'm Jacob. Now, we don't think much about names, right? We pick a name that's cute. That's a cute little name, and we spell it really funny. I don't know why we do that, but we do that nowadays. But in the Bible, names had specific meaning. Like, I think my parents named me specifically. Kevin means handsome. Of course, that's why they named me Kevin, right? Now, Jacob, his name means heel grabber, deceiver, cheater. This is the entirety of Jacob's life in one word. And I think you see Jacob acknowledging his name is a bit of a confession. Yes, I'm the heel grabber. Yes, I'm the schemer. Yes, I'm the self-sufficient one. Yes, I'm Jacob, the one who's made a mess of everything. And I love this because God doesn't argue with him. He doesn't say, well, Jacob, you're not really that bad. Well, Jacob, you just had some difficult circumstances growing up, and so it excuses you. You're okay now. You've grown a lot. No, God receives his confession. Now listen to this, verse 28. God says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and have prevailed. In that moment, God gives him a new name and a new identity. Do you know what this means for Jacob? For Jacob, that means he's not renamed the guy who got his act together. He's not named the guy who became religious. He's not named the guy who figured some things out and became better. His name is Israel. That says God strives and God prevails. Which means his new identity isn't rooted in his own improvement. It's rooted in God's relentlessness of continuing to pursue Jacob. Continuing to pursue Jacob to the point that Jacob would depend fully on him. Which means for Jacob, no longer is he defined by his baggage. No longer is he defined by his shame, by his scheming, by his plans, by his self-sufficiency. God pursued him. God wrestled him. God broke him and refused to let go of him. And I want you to notice that this is what transformation is going to look like. Because sometimes we have this idea, we love the Disney story, where you see all the hard stuff happening, and then it ends up happily ever after. Everybody's happy. There's no more problems anymore. That's not how transformation works, right? Jacob doesn't walk away with his past completely erased. Those 20 years of scheming, those however old he is, his years of scheming, they haven't disappeared. Because transformation, listen to this, is not the removal of your struggle. It's a redefinition of who you are inside of it. He's no longer Jacob the deceiver doing better. His new identity is Israel, the one who God would not stop fighting for. How good is that? How good is that? Number 4 for us. Last point, Jacob has a new walk. It says in verse 31, that the sun rose upon Jacob as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Do you see that final image here? This isn't a victory lap. This isn't him jumping up and down, celebrating. Look, we did it. I met God. It was wonderful. No, he's got a limp. He's walking away with a limp. The greatest moment of his life. And he's walking away wounded. And I want us to just sit in that for just a moment. Think about this. All of Jacob's story, everything that's led up to this point, that God's been pursuing him and chasing him. Again, we love those stories that have the happily ever after. But that's not what Jacob gets. In fact, I'd love to ask a few of those people that are a little bit older than me in this room. How many of you got the happily ever after story? No problems. Everything was perfect. Kids were great. Family was great. Relationships were great. Money was great. Life was great. I don't know if anybody's get that story. But I want you to understand this limp is not incidental. It's not a footnote. This limp is a personal embodiment of what happened on that night. Because here's the deal. Like you and I, we cannot encounter God at any depth. We cannot encounter him at any depth and walk away the same. Or even walk away in the same way. See, his wounding was the blessing. The limp was a reminder of his weakness. That every step that Jacob's going to take for the rest of his life, oh, ouch, oh, ouch, oh, ouch, is a reminder for the rest of his life and a reminder to anybody else watching him walk that something happened that night. That limp was not failure, it was formation of what God was doing in him. In fact, this is ultimately the posture of the Christian life. In the Christian life, we are not people who have it all together. We're not people who our past gets all resolved and our struggles are tidily resolved and cleaned up and look real pretty. No, the Christian life is people that walk with a limp, but we are marked by God's grace. We are shaped by this weakness, but we're not defined by what we've done. Because when we walk with that limp, it is a testimony. It is a testimony that God has met me in the darkness, and God refused to let me go. I mean, I think about what a limp looks like for me. And I can remember a point 10, 11 years ago here at Restoration Church. Going through a hard season at church. It's funny how churches do that, right? Going through this difficult season. And I remember feeling the weight of all of that. And I remember just feeling totally incapable, totally insufficient, totally alone. And I experienced probably depression for several months of my life. I'm just feeling sorry for myself. And I'm wrestling with God. And I'm saying, God, there's got to be someone else who can lead this church better than me. That's still probably true. That is 100% true. I will acknowledge that. And I remember wrestling with God and thinking, God, there's got to be someone else that can do this. And I'm sitting in my self-pity. And one Sunday morning, and we got to baptize 5 people that Sunday morning. And I remember just feeling this one of the hardest seasons I'd ever experienced. God just reminded me, I will build my church. It's not about your insufficiency. It's not about your weakness. It's not about your abilities. It's not about your leadership. I will build my church. And so me walking away with that limp, look, I know my limitations. I know my strengths, my weaknesses. I know what I bring to the table. But I have confidence that whatever happens at Restoration Church isn't because of me. God's gave that promise. I will build my church. It's God's church, not mine. Let me ask you, what's your limp? What's that wound? That wound you're not proud of, right? You wouldn't choose it. You wouldn't choose it for somebody else. But what is that season for you? What is that loss that you experienced? What is the thing that God broke and took away from you that changed the way that you walk with God, that left you broken and clinging to him? Listen, that limp is not shame. It's a testimony. It's proof that God has taken hold of you. In fact, here's our summary for this passage. Here's our big idea. That God changes us. Change is possible. But God changes us not by fixing our grip or making our grip stronger, but by breaking it, right? Jacob wrestled with God that night, got broken, and clung to him in desperation. And Jacob walked away with a new identity. He was wounded and blessed. He was broken and new. Simultaneously, those two things can still be true, right? His grip wasn't fixed. It wasn't strengthened. It was broken. And in that breaking, everything else changed. So the question I feel like we have to ask ourselves this morning, what do you need to let God do for what he needs to do in your life? Let's get real practical here, a couple points of application. Number 1, identify your Jabbok. The Jabbok was the river that Jacob sent his family across, and he's sitting on the banks. And that was where God wrestled with him. It was represented the place where Jacob's self-sufficiency ran out. He was exhausted, out of control, out of options. What's that place for you? The place where your grip just isn't working anymore. The place where your control no longer is enough. Not just a hard situation, but the place where you've done everything in your ability and it hasn't worked. What's that place for you? Is it the marriage that you tried to fix for years and you couldn't? Is it the anxiety that you've tried to manage for all this time and you haven't yet surrendered? Is it the relationship that you've got all the strategies that you've tried, everything, and it hasn't brought the shift? Is it the sin that you've been white-knuckling, trying to control over and over and over again and find yourself back in the depths? Is it the grief that just doesn't seem to lift? Listen, I don't want to trivialize our suffering. But oftentimes, God is going to exhaust us through these things. So we learn not to grasp to our own strength and our own abilities, so that we would finally relent and be desperate enough to say, God, I can't do this. I need you. What is that for you? Name it. Be willing to name it. And number 2, I couldn't decide what to call it. I gave it 2 names. Surrender it to God, or cling and refuse to let go. Cling to God and refuse to let go. It almost sounds like a bit of a contradiction. Cling to God, refuse to let go, surrender. And it really is a contradiction. But it's also the heart of this passage. Because to surrender doesn't mean to give up. It means to grab onto and not let go. In fact, one of the most brilliant minds in the church history is a guy by the name of Augustine. And Augustine spent years and years running from God, pursuing pleasure in every sort of way. Running from God, and he knew he was running from God. And everything came to his breaking point where he was in the middle of a garden in Milan, broken, alone, weeping, completely undone. And Augustine would say he cried out in pain and desperation and said, "How long? How long, Lord? Why not now?" It wasn't a fancy prayer. He was broken at the end of himself and desperate, clinging to God, refusing to let go. And Augustine would say that was a moment that God met him there, that God changed his life and ultimately shaped the history of the Christian church. Let me ask, are you desperate for God? Not desperate for success or prosperity or peace. Are you desperate for God? Have you finally cried out to say, God, I need you. God, now. God, I cannot do this without you. God, I cannot go on without you. Listen, God's not afraid of your desperation. God's not afraid of it. It's not irreverent. In fact, when we are that desperate for God, that's probably the most honest prayer that we can ever pray. God, I can't do this. God, I need you. This passage, you know what it tells us? It tells us that God honors that type of prayer. Where we are so desperate, we're saying, God, I can do nothing but cling to you and say, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. We might walk away with a limp, but man, we walk away changed. And everything is different. And do you realize that this clinging to God only makes sense because of Jesus? Because what we do today is we cling to God through his son, Jesus. And Jesus was broken so that we wouldn't be permanently destroyed. Oh, Jesus had his own Jabbok moment. Remember in the Garden of Gethsemane? When he was alone and overwhelmed, and he asked God, there's got to be another way. But there wasn't. And so Jesus went to the cross, and he died in our place, and he was given a new name, a name above every other name, so that we could be given a new identity, not based on our righteousness, but based on his. So that's what this is calling us to do, to surrender, to be desperate, to cry out to God, to cling to him. You know the great thing is that when we cling to him, right, he doesn't reluctantly just tolerate it. No, he's the Father who gave his Son so that we can become the children of God. He's like, yes, finally, yes. And last thing for us this morning, man, if you've got a limp, well, let your limp be worth something. Jacob didn't have to apologize for his limp. His limp was evidence. It was a testimony that something had really happened, that no amount of self-sufficiency or strength or religion could produce on its own. His limp was not shame. It was proof. It was a testimony. In fact, I think about there's some folks in our church. I love this conversation talking about anxiety and saying, man, I struggled with anxiety for such a long time. And it was weird because that's one of those things that God in a moment could just take away. God would be like, boom, you're healed. It's gone. It's gone. But his friend was saying, hey, God didn't take this anxiety away from me, and I wrestled with him for a long time. But you know what that anxiety was? It's what led them to anchor deep into the Lord. Their faith became so much more tangible and deeper and stronger. And now that limp, as she has learned how to struggle with this anxiety, has become a testimony. And she's been able to help encourage people around her. Listen, what is your limp? Let your limp mean something, what you've been through. Someone in your life needs to see you walk with that limp. Not because your story's finished, but because they need to know that God meets people in the darkness, meets people in the anxiety, meets people in the middle of the divorce, meets people in the suffering, in the grief, and the loss, and the anger, and the struggle. That God shows up, and that this wound and this blessing can be experienced simultaneously. And that is good news.